Welcome to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast, where you'll find insight, analysis, and the story behind the numbers.
Hi dear listeners, this is Raja Simhan. Welcome to the State of the Economy podcast. In this episode, we will talk about India's ambitious project to build an international container transshipment port at Great Nicobar Island at a cost of nearly 41,000 crores. This includes from both the government and the PPP concessionaire. The port, when fully operational, will have a capacity to handle 16 million containers per year. In the first phase, it will handle about 4 million containers. How important is this project for India's maritime sector? Let's listen to what Jagannarayan Padmanabhan, Senior Director and Global Head, Transport, Logistics and Mobility, CRISIL, has to say. Can you just comment on this India's ambitious project of Nicobar transshipment port, Jagan?
Yeah, thanks, Raja, for having me here. I think the whole transshipment as a concept is something very important for us in India as as an economy looking forward, becoming a $5 trillion economy and with a greater focus on manufacturing and expecting about a 25% contribution to the GDP. The whole logistics and the logistics cost aspect is an important one, and also the exempt trade, and that's where the whole transshipment aspect comes in. And for all of this to be piecing up together, for us to have a security as well in terms of the overall exempt trade, it's important that we have a transshipment port and of scale being present in India. To that extent, yes, the Nicobar Islands project on the port development focused on transshipment is an important and a critical development. Having said that, this is going to be a project which we will, it will take its time to come through. So it could be a decade kind of an opportunity, which will pan out over a decade for it to come to scale. So that's the context in which I'm seeing this whole Nicobar Island transshipment port.
But considering that we have many projects which had faced so many problems, project of this magnitude, what are the hurdles which are likely to come up?
Yeah, so I think hurdles are going to be there, but it will also be good to kind of understand in a way. I will extend to the first part of the question and the need for doing this. And hence, we will then know whether the kind of hurdles that we're going to face and how we'll be able to, the importance of overcoming that as well. So in the overall maritime container trade context, the ships of these containers are growing in size significantly for the last 2 or 3 decades. The largest ships about a decade and a half before was 10,000 TEUs being the 20 feet equivalent units. That's equal to one container. Today, we are talking about close to 23 to 25,000 TEUs. And why is this important? Because the larger the ship which is going to be there, the cost of transportation comes down significantly. So if you have to look at it from a 25,000 TEU to a 10,000 TEU, the cost difference can be as high as 20%. So for India, then to that extent, the aspiration of the government is to bring down the overall logistics cost from 13% of our GDP to about 8 to 10%. This becomes an important one to attack and handle. So these are the kind of potential benefits that it stands to happen. The second is there is something called as the international maritime route, which happens, and where that's the main line operators, that's the large shipping lines who operate in this route. And that is the Port Klang, Singapore, Colombo, Salalah, that's the kind of shipping route which happens. And India does not figure in that shipping route. What it means is that there is going to be a transshipment point where this will get offloaded and then the containers move into India. So all of this gets addressed by this particular port coming up in Nicobar. So that's the kind of benefit it has. And obviously the foreign exchange part of savings is also an important part which will be there. Yes, there are going to be challenges. There will be environment related challenges. that it is happening in Nicobar, where the economic activity per se, in comparison to the rest of India, is to that extent muted, will also be an important challenge to overcome. It's going to be a greenfield port. The whole funding aspect will become a big challenge. Then the overall skill part of it will be a challenge to come across. So these are, and the ecological part of it is also an important consideration that needs to be kept in when you have a port of this size coming up. And hence, those challenges needs to be studied, and the risk mitigation plan needs to be coming across. All of that has to be put in place. And that's why I said it is a story or a journey which will take its time to unfold. And while the importance is realized, there's no point going in a fast-paced manner to implement it. We need to get it right over a next 8 to 10 year period.
Colombo is already a leader in this region, and Vizhinjam is coming in a big way. Also, the Adani seems to be have a big plans for Katupalli. Considering these three, where does this transshipment port project fit in, Jagan?
Colombo traffic from India for transshipment will be close to 4 million TEUs here or there. And after factoring in to account for a double counting, because you will be lift on and lift off will happen at a particular level and a transshipment, the actual number of containers would be about 2 to 2.5 million TEUs. And that's the transshipment we are trying to divert in traffic, either to a Kattupalli or a Vizhinjam or waiting into the Nicobar part of it. Having said that, that is today's traffic. But if we are aspiring to be having a manufacturing-led GDP growth and getting it to 25%, and that is going to be a $5 trillion economy as a whole over the next decade or so, the future traffic growth can get diverted into transshipment ports. So I'll just give an example. It'll be good to understand. There is a port in Oman which is called Salalah. It's a port of Salalah, and these transshipment ports get, in a way, adopted predominantly by one particular shipping lines. And the port of Salalah was developed with the government of Oman and AP Moller Maersk. MSC shipping line, in a way, adopted that port, and they diverted all of their traffic into Salalah for redistribution in the Gulf region. So something similar would be a strategy adopted out here. There are about 3 or 4 large shipping lines, and it would be a strategy that one of those shipping lines would think Indian subcontinent is an area of focus for them. Going forward, will have to be roped in as a significant partner. I'm not prescribing a particular model of development, but that could be a possible way in which this could kind of unfold. Then that gets adopted in the overall development. Yes, when this becomes up and running, there would be competition, and the impact would be there with Colombo, some of the ports in the East Coast, and also in the Vizhinjam part of it, because Vizhinjam is, in a way, being targeted as a transshipment.
Assuming this takes off in at least a decade, do you feel that Colombo will have a tough competition, or both will exist as the Indian economy keeps going?
Yeah, as I said, both will coexist, because there are shipping lines who will adopt a particular port and move all of their cargo through a particular port, and that has been what has happened in the past. It is only a loss to that extent of the market share. It is not on the cost of one, the other will grow. To us, from an India perspective, obviously, our trade to that extent becomes insular to the geopolitical developments that can happen in the region. And our trade becomes a lot more secure in that context. So I think that's the larger battle that we are planning to win. That there will be individual wars which needs to be fought.
But looking at the numbers, Jagan, in fact, we are talking about almost 16 to 20 million TEUs annually. If it is going to be a transshipment port, will India be able to generate that kind of a volume?
It would be an eventual capacity, part profit. I don't see a particular need that you would start off with, and it wouldn't be prudent to start off with a 16 million TEU capacity to start with. So I think even a 5 million TEU capacity to start with today, the largest ports in the country in India are handling anything between 5 to 6.5 kind of a million TEU. That's something which you can start with, and then over a period of time to accommodate for growth and all of that, we can move ahead. And I have not seen the DPR or prepared the report, so I may not be directly able to comment on what is the time period for which this 16 million has been kind of looked upon. But yes, it's a fairly a large number, and I would assume it would be a need which can be satisfied over the next 2 decades kind of a journey.
India apparently is so dependent on the feeder services. Again, we are dependent on, as you said, Colombo, Port Kalang, Salalah on this side, Jebel Ali. This transshipment, and also considering that we already have a Colombo as a major transshipment, there seems to be interesting from the Chinese point of view also. They also have mega ports, the leaders in their own country, and also showing interest in Sri Lanka ports in the past. So, do you feel that we can see more Chinese investments coming into Sri Lanka possibly to counter the kind of projects which we are talking about in Nicobar?
I'm not commenting upon the Chinese investment coming in there, but if we were to look at for growth for Colombo itself, unlike a Singapore, it has multiple other nations around it. For Colombo, the significant contributor for the transshipment would be India, because you have Singapore very much nearer, and hence there is no other country which is going to directly call on Colombo. They would go into Singapore and get that evacuated. So I think the point I'm saying is that the growth of Colombo will be significantly dependent upon India. And that brings back to the previous point for a geopolitical consideration to secure our trade lines. It would be good to have a transshipment port based out of India. In a way, once you're getting it based in India, it is no longer to that extent transshipment for India. It is landing in an Indian shore, but it gets transshipped to the other ports within India. So the investments could continue to be coming into neighboring countries for geopolitical considerations. But for India, at least, the need to secure the trade is what will be important to look at.
Going by the initial, whatever the government said, the plan is to invest almost 40,000 crores. Should it be confined only to containers?
So what are the typical lines that you have of business in the port? You have a liquid, you will have bulk, and you will have containers. On the bulk side of the business, the East Coast has fairly large ports. And also, when you have bulk, you need connectivity, which is a very important aspect to look at, and which gets connected to. So we are talking about, let's say, a coal. So the connectivity to a coal mine for a efficient evacuation will be an important aspect. In and around Nicobar, there are obviously no such availability of mines for the whole bulk part of it. So that particular cargo is in a way taken off, from the consideration set. The second one that you could look at is the liquid. Yes, some level of bunkering can be all same for energy security, can be considered at the port, and I'm sure it is a non-compete cargo, and that warrants merit. But that is all as a part B to the whole plan. The part A is obviously the containers and the need to have a transshipment port for the points that I mentioned in terms of cost savings, in terms of shipping being along the shipping line, the mainline operators shipping line route, which is what is making us go towards Nicobar, and the availability of draft. So for today, 25,000 TEU vessel, we are looking at a draft of anything between 17 to 18 meters. And that's what is available at Nicobar. And hence, from a location perspective, it merits that it primarily focuses on containers, and while the other ports are there for the bulk and the liquid part.
When it comes through, do you feel it will be a game changer for the entire maritime sector for India?
Game changer would be a very strong statement, but it would be something from cost perspective. It will bring down the logistics cost significantly. That's number one. The second part of it would be the whole trade getting secured as per our terms. That's the second part. The third one would be that we would be, have the East Coast ports can thrive on the container part. Today, the split between the East and the West Coast, if you were to say, the East would be about 35% and the West Coast would be handling about 65% of the containers, and it can get balanced out. The other important point, I should mention this, is the level of containerization in India is quite low. And going forward, as we get into to become a developed country, this can increase significantly. So I think from a new cargo generation potential or the new cargos getting containerized as a potential will increase significantly, and hence this can then tap into it. Once you bring down the cost down, the shift there becomes a tipping point when the shift can for containerization can be faster and quicker. The access to market increases. So all of that will certainly not only from a maritime trade perspective, but the overall economy can benefit significantly. And yes, to that extent, this can be a game changer.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning into the podcast.